though this video is in fact added because I talked way too long in my last poetry one, and I thought it'd be a good spot to break it up right here. Salutations! Welcome to Loving the Language of Literacy. My name is Sophia Lee, and today I'll be telling you about everything that I have learned in the past year of writing poetry. This video is in conjunction with my poetry writing routine slash so you want to write a poem video, and essentially growing up I always thought poetry was a very upper crust kind of posh genre, and I had no idea about the spoken word slash slam poetry community. I knew that modern poets existed, but I never actively went out and searched for them. And then in school, of course, all we heard was a bunch of old people. And I'm not saying those poems aren't good, but for who I was at that time and for my age, it wasn't relatable. My most distinct memory of poetry writing for actual pleasure and not for a school assignment was actually when I was doing legend fan fiction poetry. Oh my goodness, those days. You can probably chase it down. There aren't that many poems in the legend fan fiction archive, and if they are, they're probably mine. Anyways, the point is, that was when I really started exploring the genre and what it could do in terms of self-expression. Fast forward to a year ago from this present day, when I first started taking classes at the Young Authors Academy. If you missed out on some of those videos, I did playwriting in the first initial 10 weeks. After that, because of my boyfriend at the time, who was absolutely loving the class, and I'd always wanted to explore the genre since developing over the years and dabbling here and there. Most of it, I have to admit, probably all of it was bad and just like...
Her lips were red as blood, it rained like cats and dogs.
I don't even know why those are good examples. Like, that's one of them is an idiom and one of them is a very terribly overused simile. I really had no idea what I was doing in terms of poetry, and that was, I remember distinctly actually, it was April 31st of last year when that happened, but I had been trying to write poetry here and there before that because of having my first boyfriend last year around this time. It kind of got those creative juices flowing, if you know what I mean. I didn't really consider myself a poet. I didn't consider myself good at poetry. When I actually started taking poetry classes at the Young Authors Academy, that's when everything was expanded. I was exposed to so many modern 21st century poems, as well as poets my age, younger and older, who were just so freaking talented. I was like, I better start honing in my craft on this because I will just feel like a complete fool in this class otherwise. After that, I just started chasing down and pursuing the genre. I literally binge watched so many button poetry poems off the YouTube channel. I have to admit, in terms of my actual experience as a person, I prefer listening to poems versus actually reading them just because of the inflections and the tone of voice, especially when it's read directly from the author himself. To actually progress with the story, I have been going to the Young Authors Academy for the past year at this point. I have been joining different things such as the creative writing course at my high school and then the first story here in Oxford, and basically I'm turning what would have been maybe a 4-minute video into probably 8, maybe 10 by speaking so long, and it's around 7 or 8 things that I have learned in the past astounding year of actually coming to terms with my identity as a poet, and a lot of being confronted with comparison of myself to people who've been published, people who I think are better than me, and I'm just gonna go jump into the tips right now. The first one being that cliches are not always bad. I have to admit, in the beginning I was using so many different cliches and things I've heard a dozen times, and even when you get to writing poems pretty regularly, you hear cliches that you keep bringing up again and again in your own writing, or tendencies you have to lean towards one syllable or one sound. I wouldn't suggest saying that something was red as blood every single time you're describing the color red. If you use them properly, they can actually have an extremely creative spin, especially when you write a cliche and it doesn't have the original intention behind it. Second thing, poetry is extremely malleable in all definitions of the word and context you can think about, whether it is the structure, the form, the style, the content, and what actually qualifies as a poem is extremely malleable as well, whether it's a single sentence, whether it's an epic, whether it's closer to telling a story or focusing specifically on a metaphor. It can be anything that you want. The third thing I have learned is that poems are powerful in terms of how concise they are, in terms of the punch they pack, in terms of what exactly the author is trying to say. In a lot of ways, and again, I'm not trying to disregard books or novels or any other longer pieces of text in the very slightest, but in a lot of ways, poetry is one of the most powerful styles and forms of writing we have, just because of the fact that It is very short to read, and it tends to be a lot more dense than anything else you would read in maybe a longer work. Fourth thing I want to mention is that what I like to do a lot is associate metaphors with concrete ideals. And basically what I'm saying is that you can talk for ages and ages about love, and no matter how good you are, there has to be some bit of concrete thought, some concrete image, some concrete idea for you to hold on to, whether it is the curtain behind me, the camera I'm filming on, whatever it is. You have to have details. And that brings me into my fifth tip, which is not actually mine at all, but it's one that I've been considering and thinking about so much since I learned it from Ruta Sepetys, the author of Salt to the Sea and Between Shades of Grey and Out of the Easy. Her tip was specificity is authenticity, and when you have the very short amount of time to make your words count, such as in a poem, I would definitely recommend using this tip. The sixth thing I would like to mention is do not be afraid whatsoever to come back, whether it means to an unfinished poem or maybe even just come back to a line, a specific phrase, the wording of something, the tone that you had that may not have had the perfect home and didn't fit perfectly with the rest of the pieces in the puzzle in this one poem, but it may be perfect in the thing that another poem absolutely needs. The last thing I want to tell you that I've learned in the year of me writing poetry is that poetry is probably one of, if not the most personal form of writing, just because of its malleability and because of everything you can do and everything you can say. It is such a personal journey, and my biggest problem before was the fact that I thought that my poems were too much about me, and I do have to admit they are very me-centered because I use them a lot as therapy and working through my thoughts and ideas. And while I have learned ways to work around this and maybe make it not as prominent and to include other ideas, I have to say that making poems as personal as they are, as hard-hitting, as gut-wrenching, as truthful as your own story is, that is sometimes what differentiates it between a piece of poetry and a piece of prose. Just the way you go about describing your story and who you are and everything that is involved with what you are trying to say. Tell me in the comments below what you have learned writing whatever genre you write, whether it's playwriting, poetry, or fiction, or creative nonfiction, whatever it is. I probably have at least tried it or failed miserably attempting it, and I would love to know, and any advice that you share will be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. Keep calm, read on, and I'll see you in a video very soon. Goodbye. If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, and subscribe. On my social media is at SLSBooks.